Welcome back! Today we're going to be looking at Shakespeare's Hamlet, Act I. Now, if you've watched my video over Shakespeare and plot, you've seen that the first act of a Shakespeare play is usually the exposition. So we're going to be looking at the way Shakespeare opens up and develops his characters, his setting, and the conflict. Hamlet starts in something of a surprising way. I have a literary game in which one guesses the first line of famous books. Without looking, can you guess the first line of Hamlet? Considering that it's probably Shakespeare's most famous work, we would normally think of maybe something lengthy and poetic. However, the first line is actually, "Who's there?" In fact, the whole first page is very quick and sparse dialogue between two very frightened soldiers. Instead of easing us into the story with a lengthy poetic section, Shakespeare throws us into the action in a very fast-paced and intense kind of way. The mood he sets for the first scene is fearful and nerve-wracking. A soldier standing guard is relieved by another guard, and instead of a peaceful switch-out, they both confront each other. We can hear the fear behind the greeting. Compare this with the second scene, in which the characters have lengthy and ceremonious monologues as they stand in the court. The guards are fearful, and they know something is going on, but they aren't quite sure what it is yet. Quickly, we discover that the guards have more than one thing to be afraid of. We discovered that the guards have been undergoing a lot of changes. Their schedule has intensified to the point where they don't get Sundays off or evenings off anymore. There's been a huge increase in the construction of armaments and fortifications. Something is going on, and the soldiers don't know what it is. And to make matters much worse, some of them have been seeing a ghost stalking around after midnight. In fact, after seeing a ghost for a couple of times, some of the guards have called a young scholar named Horatio to come join them. Horatio, being a scholar and an educated man, has a better chance of being able to speak with the ghosts, since ghosts probably speak Latin in the afterlife. Horatio, though, again, being a scholar and an intellectual, doesn't believe in this whole ghost thing. When Bernardo first greets him and says, "Say, is Horatio there?" Horatio answered, "A piece of him." In other words, yeah, I'm kinda here, but not entirely. Something that some of my students experience from time to time. A piece of them may be here, but they're certainly not here, or here. Marcellus says, "Horatio says 'tis but our fancy, and will not let belief take hold of him touching this dreaded sight twice seen of us. Therefore I have entreated him along with us to watch the minutes of this night, that if again this apparition come, he may approve our eyes and speak to it." Horatio answers, "Tush, tush, 'twill not appear." He doesn't believe them, but as soon as they start telling the story again, in comes the ghost, and now Horatio believes. Bernardo says, "How now, Horatio? You tremble and look pale. Is not this something more than fantasy? What think you on it? And you thought we were just telling you a story, didn't you?" Not only is it a ghost, which is strange enough, but it's the ghost of the dead king. And so we begin to get a political backdrop for what's going on in this play. Denmark had a very successful and warlike king named Hamlet. Horatio mentions his successes in war against Poland and against Norway. And then, not long ago, the king died, but not in battle. Horatio thinks that the dead king walking around in armor is a bad sign for the state. This bodes some strange eruption to our state. Marcellus brings up the strange changes in the military enhancements, and then we also hear a bit more about the politics. After the death of King Hamlet, there's been a lot of change. Not only has their strong king just passed away, but there's also trouble brewing in Norway. You see, old King Hamlet beat old King Fortinbras of Norway. Old Fortinbras was killed in the battle and forfeited a whole lot of property. Afterwards, old King Hamlet died in his garden. But old King Fortinbras had a son, young Fortinbras. And young Fortinbras is eager to restore his family's honor. His father was killed in battle and lost a lot of property. Now young Fortinbras wants to regain that property and therefore honor his father. He can't avenge himself on old King Hamlet, but he can avenge himself on Denmark. And now that the great military leader, old King Hamlet, is gone, there's something of a vacuum in the state. Who's taking the place? We'll get to a few more of the political implications of the changeover between old King Hamlet and the new king, King Claudius, in Scene 2. Horatio also brings up the fact that ghosts walking the earth at night is a bad sign, just like in Julius Caesar's day. Shakespeare wrote a play about that, with all the omens and portents in Act 2. But again the ghost arrives, and this time they try again to speak to it, and when it won't speak to them, they even threaten it with their weapons. Of course, you can't do much to a ghost, it's already dead. And when the rooster or the cock crows, the ghost disappears. After all, ghosts are things of the night, and the rooster summons in the day. Marcellus even brings up the fact that on Christmas, the rooster crows all night, and therefore no ghost can walk. I don't know if you knew that. They decide to go talk to Prince Hamlet, the son of old King Hamlet, and let him know what they've seen. And so we leave the cold, fearful watch and return to the stately court of Elsinore. Scene 2 opens with great ceremony. There's the king and queen and all of the courtiers all around. And the king is in the middle of a speech as we open up. Though yet of Hamlet, our dear brother's death, the memory be green, and that it us befitted to bear our hearts in grief, and our whole kingdom to be contracted in one brow of woe. Yet so far hath discretion fought with nature, that we with wisest sorrow think on him, together with remembrance of ourselves. Therefore our sometime sister, now our queen, the imperial jointress to this warlike state, have we, as 'twere, with a defeated joy, with an auspicious and a drooping eye, with mirth in funeral, and with dirge in marriage, in equal scale weighing delight and dole taken to wife. And we come to discover that the new king, King Claudius, is the brother of old King Hamlet. Now this is interesting in a lot of ways. First of all, why isn't old King Hamlet's son the new king? It's not that he's too young. Although he acts like a teenager in this book, he's about 30 at least. Do the math in Act 5. And yet, instead of him inheriting the throne, his uncle, Claudius, inherits the throne. His uncle is trying to do honor to his dead brother by saying, oh, it's so sad that he's dead. But at the same time, he's celebrating his own marriage to his dead brother's wife. And his brother's only been dead a couple months. So we get a super creepy turnaround here. Old King Hamlet dies. Immediately after, his brother steps into the throne and marries his wife. And now young Hamlet has a brand new stepdad, creepy Uncle Claudius. How's that gonna go over? And Claudius in the middle of this court is now going to address the political issue of young Fortinbras. Here he is, a threat to their state. Now follows that you know young Fortinbras holding a weak supposal of our worth, or thinking by our late dear brother's death our state be disjointed out of frame, colleagued with this dream of his advantage, he hath not failed to pester us with message importing the surrender of those lands lost by his father, with all bands of law to our most valiant brother. So much for him. Now for ourself, and for this time of meeting, thus much the business is, we have here writ to Norway, uncle of young Fortinbras, who, impotent and bedrid, scarcely hears of his nephew's purpose, to suppress his further gait herein, in that the levies, the lists, and full proportions are all made out of his subject. So Claudius, after stepping in for the great late King Hamlet, is seen by Fortinbras as the weak link. Fortinbras seems to feel that with the transition of power, so Claudius outlines his plan for stopping Fortinbras. You see, young Fortinbras has an uncle, old Norway, who is described as impotent and bedrid, and he seems to be the real power in Norway. So all Claudius is going to do is write to old Norway and tell him to get his nephew in line. Okay, there's an old King Hamlet and a young King Hamlet and a stinky Uncle Claudius. There's an old King Fortinbras, a young Fortinbras, and a crummy Uncle Norway. Do we see any parallels here? One thing to keep our eyes open for in this play are all of the foils for Prince Hamlet. A foil is a character who serves as a comparison or contrast for our main character so that we can better understand our main character. Now usually a foil is a sense of contrast, but in order for a contrast to be effective, we have to have a context in which to compare the two. In this case, the family layout is the same between young Hamlet and young Fortinbras. As we progress onward, we're going to compare the two and see how starkly they are foiled. But how they respond to their situation is what truly defines them. Keep your eyes on that as we go. Also notice Claudius's foreign policy. Young Fortinbras is a sincere threat to Denmark. We felt that in the opening scene. And Claudius's method of stopping him is by telling on him to his pathetic old uncle? What's old Norway gonna do?
Stop that, Fortinbras.
We begin to suspect that Claudius is not anything the king that old King Hamlet was. After dismissing his servants to Norway, he moves on to his next order of business, which is Laertes. There's a young man named Laertes who's ready to go to school. He's part of the court, and he's returned for the coronation, but now he's requesting to return to Paris and go back to school. He's the son of one of the great courtiers of King Claudius, whose name is Polonius. Claudius's response to Laertes is as follows. "Take thy fair hour, Laertes. Time be thine, and thy best graces spend it at thy will. You go get him, Laertes." And then he turns to his new stepson, Hamlet. "But now, my cousin Hamlet, and my son." The first point that both Claudius and Queen Gertrude make towards Hamlet is that he's looking so depressed. "Why you gotta spoil our party, Hamlet?" The king says, "How is it that the clouds still hang upon you?" And the queen says, "Good Hamlet, cast thy nighted colour off, and let thine eye look like a friend on Denmark. Do not forever with thy veiled lids seek for thy noble father in the dust. Thou know'st 'tis common that all lives must die, passing through nature to eternity." And Hamlet says, "Aye, madam, it is common." She replies, "If it be, why seems it so particular with thee?" And Hamlet answers, "Seems, madam? Nay, it is, I know not seems. 'Tis not alone my inky cloak, good mother, nor customary suits of solemn black, nor windy suspiration of forced breath, no, nor the fruitful river in the eye, nor the dejected havior of the visage, together with all forms, moods, shapes of grief that can denote me truly. These indeed may seem, for they are the actions that a man might play, but I have that within, which passes show, these but the trappings and the suits of woe." So they're like, "Come on, why you gotta act so depressed? This is our wedding ceremony. Don't you know that everybody dies?" And his mother says, "So then why is it so special to you? Why are you acting like it's so particular to you?" And Hamlet's like, "It doesn't seem! I'm really sad! I'm not faking it here, okay?" Listen to King Claudius's reply, and consider, as he's speaking, whether his advice is good. What points does he make about death, and about grief, and about loss? One of the most important themes in this play. "'Tis sweet and commendable in your nature, Hamlet, to give these mourning duties to your father. But you must know your father lost a father. That father lost his, and the survivor bound in filial obligation for some term, to do obsequious sorrow. But to persever in obstinate condolement is a course of impious stubbornness. 'Tis unmanly grief. It shows a will most incorrect to heaven, a heart unfortified, a mind impatient, an understanding simple and unschooled. For what we know must be, and is as common as any the most vulgar thing to sense, why should we in our peevish opposition take it to heart? Fie, 'tis a fault to heaven, a fault against the dead, a fault to nature, to reason most absurd, whose common theme is death of fathers, and who still hath cried from the first course till he that died today, this must be so. We pray you throw to earth this unprevailing woe, and think of us as of a father. For let the world take note, you are the most immediate to our throne, and with no less nobility of love than that which dearest father bears his son do I impart toward you." He starts by saying, yes, all of us will have to experience death at some point. We all lose our fathers, and all our fathers lost their fathers, and so on throughout history. There's nobody who didn't lose a father. And so, because it's the way nature works, you've got to accept it. Not only that, but to cry so much is wrong. It's impious, in other words, it's not good religion. It's unmanly, you wuss. And it's a wronging the dead. You've got to accept them. All this from a man whose brother just died, and then he turned around and married his brother's wife. Is it fair for him to lay all this upon Hamlet? His first point was that it's okay to have a grief period, but you gotta get over it. But have they let Hamlet get over it? No! And then to add insult to injury, did you see how he responded in the end there? So think of me as your dad, Hamlet. After all, I'm planning on you being my heir. Okay, first of all, you're not my daddy, creepy Uncle Claudius. Second, why isn't Hamlet inheriting in the first place? For Claudius to be like, hey, don't worry, you're my heir, sounds more like an insult than anything. Oh, whoop-de-doo! Not only that, but then Claudius continues and says, For your intent in going back to school in Wittenberg, it is most retrograde to our desire, and we beseech you, bend you to remain here in the cheer and comfort of our eye, our chiefest courtier cousin, and our son. In other words, I know you wanted to go back to school and maybe like get your mind off of everything that's in Denmark, get away from this place that's driving you crazy, but no, we want to keep an eye on you. Compare and contrast that with Laertes, random courtier who he's like, you go get him, son, you go out there and you go to school and you show the world. And Hamlet? No, you have to sit here and think about your dead dad, and I get to be your daddy now. We can see why Hamlet's having problems. Hamlet doesn't answer Claudius, but Queen Gertrude steps in and says, let not thy mother lose her prayers, Hamlet. I pray thee stay with us, go not to Wittenberg. Hamlet, I shall in all my best obey you, madam. He accepts his mother's word, maybe not happily, depends on how you want to play that line, but we certainly feel very uncomfortable about Hamlet's position here. There's a lot about parent-child relationships in this play, and it's something that I think that young people can really tie into. How do you deal with parents who are being ridiculously unfair? And what is your duty towards them? How do you deal with the creepy stepdad that's come in here and taken everything from you? After they all exit, Hamlet has his first soliloquy. The soliloquies in the play Hamlet are extremely important. A soliloquy is a long monologue, a speech spoken by one single character, but it's spoken in such a way that the other characters don't hear it, only the audience hears it. It's a way for the character to unpack his or her feelings, to open his or her thoughts, and allow the audience in. The soliloquies in Hamlet are some of the most famous in the world. I've already done this soliloquy for YouTube once, so if you'd like to watch that, you can click on the link at the end, or you can click in the description below. So I'm just going to hit the highlights for now. Hamlet opens with the idea that he wishes that his flesh would just melt away. He's so miserable, and in such agony, and in such mental despair, that he no longer wants to exist. I just want to melt. I just want to just disappear. And then he turns his curse on the world around him. How weary, stale, flat, and unprofitable seems to me all the uses of this world. Fie, 'tis an unweeded garden that grows to seed. Things rank and gross in nature possess it merely. But then he turns to the main object of his frustration, which is his mother. Now he comments several times about his father, he comments about his uncle, but the main central point of this whole speech is his issue with Mom. As his father is but 2 months dead, nay, not so much, not 2. So excellent a king that was to this, Hyperion to a satyr, so loving to my mother, that he might not beteem the winds of heaven visit her face too roughly. My dad was so awesome! He was such a great husband that he would even protect Gertrude from the rough winds, being like, no, don't blow on my wife's face too hard. And Hamlet sets up the first of his 2 analogies in this speech. Old King Hamlet was to Claudius as Hyperion to a satyr. Hyperion is a god, and a satyr is a goat man. So Daddy was like a god, and creepy Uncle Claudius is like a goat. He remembers how his mother used to just hang on his father and how affectionate they seemed, and yet, before her shoes that she wore to the funeral have even got scuffs on them, she's already making out with Uncle Claudius. Frailty, thy name is woman! Oh God, a beast that wants discourse of reason would have mourned longer. And he moves on to his second analogy. This uncle of his, no more like my father than I to Hercules. Okay, the previous analogy compared Old King Hamlet to a god, and Claudius to a goat. Now, notice the way he lays it out. Old King Hamlet is like Hercules, huge, warlike hero. And Claudius is like Hamlet. Sure, Hamlet's scrawny and weak and nothing like the powerful Hercules, but notice the fact that he's always casting these great things about his father. And now we also see his feelings about himself. Hamlet not only hates his situation, not only is angry with his mother, disgusted with his uncle, and grieving over his father, but he's also filled with self-loathing. He feels helpless here and miserable to the point that he hates himself and wishes he were dead. It is not, nor it cannot come to good, but break my heart, for I must hold my tongue. The worst part is that he can't even say anything about it. All these awful feelings are boiling inside him, and he has to just hold his tongue. Now, we've seen that he does slide in some snarky remarks under the surface, making that pun earlier about son. But even though he does that quiet, mumbling sarcasm in the background, he can't actually express his frustration and his grief to his uncle, or to his mother, or to anyone. He's alone. But at this moment, before Hamlet sinks any deeper to despair, he has some visitors. In walks the guards who were looking at the ghost last night, and Horatio, his old friend from school. Hamlet's actually pretty happy to see Horatio, and asks him what he's doing here. Horatio says, "A truant disposition, good my lord. I just decided to skip school." But Hamlet's not having that. He says, "No, really, tell me why you're here." Horatio says, "I came for your father's funeral." And Hamlet says, "No, I think you came to my mother's wedding." Horatio's like, it was really quick. Thrift, Horatio. The funeral baked meats did coolly furnish forth the marriage tables. In other words, we had the wedding so quick to save on the caterer's bill, we could just use the leftovers from the funeral. And then Hamlet, in this moment of thinking what his father would think if he could see this, says, "My father, methinks I see my father." And we have this little joke. Horatio's sort of startled by this. Hamlet saying, "Methinks I see my father," because he's sort of imagining what his father would look like in this situation. And Horatio's like, "Whoa, you really see your father?" Because remember, Horatio was just looking at the ghost of his father. And Hamlet's like, "What? In my mind's eye. What's wrong with you?" But Horatio points out, "Hey, I saw your father just the other night as a ghost." Hamlet is really worked up by that. Again, look at the speed of the dialogue after this. We go from, again, those long speeches to quick back and forths. Hamlet spouting dozens of quick questions and they're answering him just as quickly. Hamlet, of course, is fascinated by this tale and very eager to see it for himself. It concerns him. "If it assume my noble father's person, I'll speak to it, though hell itself should gape and bid me hold my peace. I pray you all, if you have hitherto concealed this sight, let it be tenable in your silence still, that whatsoever else shall hap tonight, give it an understanding but no tongue." Hamlet's determined to speak to the ghost no matter what, if it looks like his father.
Hi, Hamlet.
Hey.
Are you here today to talk about your mother?